Good morning. You might be wondering where in the world I got such a notion. Good question. Good question. A couple of years ago, I read a book that was just fascinating. It filled in a lot of the story around, I'm going to switch names from Jesus to Yeshua. He was actually here in the room Christmas Eve speaking to us, and if you noticed, he introduced himself as Yeshua ben Joseph, and that was actually his name when he was on the planet 2,000 years ago. In the Jewish Aramaic language tradition, it was Yeshua ben, son of Joseph. So that was his name. So I'm going to continue to talk about Yeshua. The New Testament has exactly, precisely one sentence concerning the time period between the age of 12 and the age of 31 when he began his public ministry. And that sentence is, Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Now, I would like to suggest, humorously perhaps, that 99% of 12-year-old boys increase in wisdom and stature by the time they're 31. So, duh. Thanks for telling us that. And if Yeshua had stayed in the neighborhood of Nazareth and Mount Carmel, he would have had interactions with people that were remembered. But the suggestion is that he took off for parts unknown. And that's what is contained in this wonderful book called Anna, the Grandmother of Jesus by Claire Hartsong. It's channeled, and when you talk about channeled work, you have to have it pass muster. Does it resonate? Does it make logical sense? Does it fill your heart with joy? Can you feel the truth of it? And if you can, okay, good. And if you can't, set it aside and let it go. So Yeshua was actually a part of the Essene community in Mount Carmel. That was the community that had been waiting for his arrival for several hundred years. The Essenes were an eclectic, esoteric branch of Judaism. And they had roots back to Egypt, the religion of Egypt. And of course, the religion of Egypt is tied to the religion of India. The Vedas and the Upanishads and the Yoga Sutras are 3,500 years old and predate the religions of Egypt and the rest of the world. So this community of Essenes knew that the teacher of righteousness, which really means the right use of energy, was on his way. And the plan was that there would be a whole group of supporting people to enable him to carry out this ministry. So this is what happened in that time window. There were a number of people who were incarnating at that time to be supporting castes. John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, several of the disciples were Essenes. In fact, most of the disciples wound up being Essenes. So the story goes that after the event at the temple in Jerusalem when Yeshua was 12, he and his parents and his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, it's not recorded in the scriptures that he was his uncle, but indeed he was. Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, Yeshua, I keep flopping back and forth because of the name of the book. Forgive me. Anna, his grandmother, had 14 children, including the oldest, Joseph of Arimathea, and the youngest, Mariana, who was Mother Mary. So Joseph of Arimathea was his uncle, and his uncle was a rich man because he had put together a string of 12 freight hauling sailboats that sailed around the Mediterranean and up to England to the tin mines on the west coast of Devon and Cornwall, and was a tin miner and trader. So he assimilated quite a bit of wealth. And the Gospels talk about the wealthy man, Joseph of Arimathea, but everybody thinks that he was born in Arimathea, but he wasn't. He was born in Mount Carmel, where Anna lived. Anna was, in fact, the head of the mystery school at Mount Carmel that was an Essene teaching organization, because the Essenes believed in gender equality. There was no difference. They were equally capable and equally spiritually advanced. So just after Yeshua's 13th birthday, he got on a sailboat with his uncle and a couple of other compatriots and took off for England. And he spent 3 years in England studying with the Druids and took initiations to expose himself to that wisdom and became literally a member of the Druid order. And after 3 years, he came back to Mount Carmel and Nazareth for just a few months, because then, just after his 17th birthday, he made a trip to India and Tibet, where he studied with Buddhists and Hindus, and actually spent a whole year with Babaji, who was the founder of the Kriya Yoga movement. And according to a number of Hindu and Buddhist records, began learning and teaching what is known as Sanatana. Sorry. That's the problem with coming up here naked. I left everything over there because I didn't want to be looking at my notes. Sanatana Dharma, which is the eternal way, the eternal truth. And there are an amazing number of swamis, including Paramahansa Yogananda and Swami Sri Ramakrishna, who treat Yeshua as one of them, that think of him as a teacher of Sanatana Dharma. So 7 years he studied and learned the ways of the East, came back to Nazareth and Mount Carmel, and decided that it was time to go back to Egypt, because indeed he spent the first 8 years of his life in Egypt waiting for Herod to die so that he could safely come back to Palestine. So it was time to go back to study under the Egyptian religion. And he did that and took initiations, including one in the Great Pyramid, in which he learned and relearned and re-taught himself the basic spiritual principles that are universally true, the so-called Sanatana Dharma. So the question then is there any record to suggest that this actually happened? Or is this just a pipe dream in some book that is channeled and not really true? Well, indeed, there's a whole raft of stories and collections of coins and artifacts indicating that indeed he may well have been in the West Country of England, including Wales. There's a book written by an archaeologist who made a sincere effort to come to the idea that that Yeshua had actually been in England studying with the Druids. And of course, there are this untold number of swamis who have had visions with Jesus and have had amazing conversations with him and believe quite firmly that he was indeed a teacher of Sanatana Dharma, and indeed one of them, a Swami just like them. There's also some records in a monastery, a Buddhist monastery in Lhasa, which happens to be in Tibet, and I'm not sure whether they're still there or not, because the Chinese government has glommed onto Tibet and taken it over, and we don't know whether or not those records still exist. But indeed, there are a number of recorded conversations and statements by people who have been there looking at them, saying that they are real, and having been told by the monks in charge of the monastery that these books say that your Jesus was here. So indeed, there are some indications that that may well be the case. And what this boils down to, and what it really means, is that Yeshua traveled the world studying and learning the ways of the world, and this cross-pollination of ideas from spiritual traditions around the world enabled him to create a teaching, a learning that was passed on to the world, and that was his purpose. He said to his grandmother on a number of occasions, this is after the resurrection, that I never intended to start a new religion or have people worship me. I simply wanted them to wake up. And that is the message that he brings today. It's the message of A Course in Miracles. It's the message that he sends. He was here on Christmas Eve saying the same thing. You are a divine being. You are love itself. And it's time to celebrate the awakening of your awareness of your Christhood. Christ is not a name, by the way. It's a pattern of understanding. And we are all Christs in the offering. And consequently, I've come to the outrageous conclusion that Yeshua was the founder of the Interfaith Movement, that he began this whole idea that the world is full of the same idea, and that we can, if we choose, become that. And all of this tussling and fighting amongst, you know how many denominations there are in Christendom? There's hundreds, maybe thousands. And everybody's niff-gnawing about the differences between this form of worship and that form of worship. And they've lost complete track of the message. And the message is that you are divine. You are infinitely loved, infinitely lovable, and infinitely loving forever. And only thing keeping you from realizing that is your thinking to the contrary. And so that is the message that began 2,000 years ago and was greatly misunderstood. Greatly misunderstood. And look what happens when a bunch of power-hungry men get in charge of the world and try to scrunch it into the power structure so that they have control over what people think and do and say and so forth. Yeshua totally ignored most of the rules of Judaism, and that's what really got him in trouble with the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because he said, we don't need rules. Everybody is infinitely loved by the Creator. Why don't you wake up? And, of course, that really is what got him in trouble and so forth. So, believe it or not, Yeshua traveled the world, learned from masters all over the world, became himself a master teacher, and is alive and well and teaching in the world as we speak. So, that's my opinion about today, and I reserve the right to change my mind tomorrow, because you never know what new book or new revelation will come along. Namaste. Thank you.